Welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on public speaking. My dear friends, as mentioned earlier in the previous lecture, that public speaking offers an individual quite a good number of opportunities to speak. But then it is not sure that every opportunity will help him or her bring laurels. In fact, at times one has to face brickbats also. But that should not belittle his faith in his own powers and should not disappoint him in the least. He may be criticized at times, but if he takes these brickbats in a very sincere manner, in a very honest manner, he or she can convert these brickbats into bouquets for the next time. And that is why in the lecture that I am going to deliver, I will be trying to underline the facts as to how feedback and criticism can help a speaker emerge better, help him become a benign speaker and an effective one, provided he takes the words of criticism in the most constructive way. Hence, this lecture has been titled Handling Feedback and Criticism. Now, as human beings, we are bound to commit mistakes. There may be lapses. And let us begin this lecture with a beautiful quote by George Bernard Shaw, a famous dramatist whom many of you might be acquainted with, who had plays like Arms and the Man, Candida, St. John and many other beautiful plays to his credit. What Bernard Shaw says is, a life spent making mistakes is not only more honorable, but more useful than a life spent doing nothing. What is the implication? The implication is that one can come across mistakes, no doubt, but then these mistakes are not to be written off. Rather, one should try to take some cues from these mistakes and make his life useful. But how can one do so? Let us see. When we talk about criticism, most of the people take criticism or consider criticism to be a very negative word. But then criticism actually refers to one's expression of judgment about individuals, event or even an object of review. Under close scrutiny, anything that will beget criticism, and most of the people, as I said earlier, take it very negatively. But criticism can be both negative as well as positive. Actually, it is human tendency to take criticism always negatively. Especially in public speaking situations, it is not only the speaker who will offer criticism, because as a speaker you have that freedom, but at the same time the audience members also have the freedom to criticize you as a speaker. So, the speaker who can offer criticism through speech, but one should simultaneously be ready to receive criticism and feedback as well. The world today is beautiful only because people respond to criticism in a very honest manner. But how many of us actually want to hear criticism? How many of us are ready to hear negative feedback? Because as humans, we have always a desire to be applauded, we have a desire to be revered, to be worshipped, and we always expect others to heap upon us words of admiration, words of praises. But then, as a speaker who has actually to survive in this world, and if it is a sort of profession for him, it actually becomes quite mandatory to understand what is criticism. Even though many of us consider it to be a negative reaction, a sort of disapproval, a sort of rejection, but then we can come across not only in written discourses, but even in oral discourses, it actually is a sort of investigation of the subject matter to discuss subsequent merits and demerits. When you use the word criticism, people often feel hurt. But if you ask him, what is the merit? And I have been telling you, my dear friends, in some of the lectures, that even your demerits can also be conveyed in a very positive manner. Apart from criticism being expressed through public speaking, as public speakers, one should always be ready to receive criticism, because this criticism may depend upon several factors, and it is those people who really want to hear criticism, they only can bring changes in their speech, in their work, in their action. So, these criticisms can be in the form of skills, verbal and non-verbal. We have already had a lecture on non-verbals, and you often might hear people saying, when you ask people to provide you with a proper feedback, you can always come across your voice was muffled, your voice was not clear, your voice lacked clarity. Sometimes one can also express it in a different manner. You appeared to be, or your voice actually had a lot of weight. It had more of a loudness. Fine. When one says more of a loudness, what one is trying to discover or what one is trying to suggest is that it should also have some amount of softness in it. So, criticism can also depend upon the skills which can be verbal, non-verbal. We have often heard people saying in certain events, in certain debates, in conferences, when you are delivering a talk or presenting a paper, you might have heard people saying everything was fine, the voice was so resonating, but then the body language actually required some improvement. And then it is content also. By content we mean message, idea and argument. So, you may be criticized as a speaker because of the lack of content. We have already discussed in the lecture on connectives that sometimes because of a disconnect between what you say, between thought and language, that also may invite criticism. And then sometimes the lack of argument, that can also invite a sort of criticism. Now, there are two words that we have been using. Sometimes people use it interchangeably: feedback and criticism. Now, what is feedback? In the lecture on communication skills, where we talked about effective communications, feedback is one thing that actually enables any process of communication to be complete or incomplete, or if there is something lacking in, it is only the feedback that can tell you. It is actually the observation of the receiver's response that can be considered to be a sort of feedback. So, feedback actually has got more connotation, more positive connotation as compared to criticism. Feedback is actually a part of task or performance which can be evaluated, and that it is only through feedback that one can come to have some amount of improvement. In several, in several professions, there are systems of appraisal. In educational institutions, students provide the feedback about the teachers. In organizations, your co-workers, your bosses, they can provide the feedback, and these feedbacks can help a person, provided the feedback is also taken in a very fair manner. In public speaking, feedback is offered by none other than the audience members who evaluate the speaker's delivery. And while they evaluate the speaker's delivery, they talk about the argument, the message, the non-verbal behavior, the personality, the response of the speaker, then the behavior of the speaker. All these are very important. Audience sometimes may offer direct feedback, fine. They may offer direct feedback verbally. Sometimes they also may provide indirect feedbacks through their non-verbal behavior. That is why we have been saying that when a speaker during the time of his delivery is very much careful, he can, through the facial expression of the audience members, can gather whether he was going in the right direction or not. Now, my dear friends, one point of caution here is that sometimes some very enthusiastic audience members, they can provide you feedback and they can be full of appreciation, but if there is a lot of appreciation, one actually needs to be very skeptic about it, because too much of appreciation, and that also on the face, is a sort of flattery which many people are habituated to do, isn't it? Now, we are in a process now where we can well understand what actually is feedback, but let me take you back to the communication process, where we say that communication is not unidirectional, it is always two-way, isn't it? The sender and the receiver, fine. And as a speaker, as a sender, what you do is you actually ideate, no? You ideate, and your idea is filtered with the medium, and then the speaker receives the feedback through the response from the audience. This feedback, as I have been saying, can help the sender or the speaker to understand the overall efficacy of his speech. A speaker may then at times clarify himself or herself better and develop their strategy. Here on the right hand side, you can find the communication process graph, where the sender will formulate the message, fine. He will encode the message for the receivers to decode it, and then the message will require a sort of medium. Now there are mediums galore nowadays, fine. And when ultimately the receiver has been able to decode it, the receiver will provide a feedback, and then in between, I mean throughout the process of communication, sometimes there may be some sort of impediments which we can call barriers, and that may at times choke the message, that times that may block the message, and naturally the feedback that will come will not be very effective. So, as a speaker, as a sender, one has to be very particular about the way he delivers the message, he ideates the message, and then the sort of medium that he has taken for, and finally he will look forward to getting the feedback of his audience members. Now, at this juncture, one has to be very clear about the difference between criticism and feedback. Now, in this table you can find that criticism actually points out the demerits of the speaker in general terms, and at times it is very harsh, it is problem oriented, it is also past oriented, whereas when we talk about the feedback, it actually focuses upon the areas where improvement is needed. Fine. Feedback is most often supportive, most often it is suggestive also. Feedback can provide you a sort of solution, and then it can also help you take or decide the future course of action. That is why it is more future oriented. Now, why should we think that both feedback and criticism, they are very much essential? Why it is so important? And that also for a public speaker, if you can gain feedback and criticism, I mean both these can enable you to take some very useful comments, very invaluable ways to help you develop or convert yourself into a better speaker, into a better performer. We have been saying that all sorts of talks, they actually are persuasive in nature. But as a speaker, have you really been persuasive? Whether you are giving a speech or a presentation, or you are having a sort of conversation, fine, you actually are trying every now and then to convince the other party your line of thinking. So, one needs a good and attentive audience. Of course, all of us need a good and attentive audience to expect a proper feedback and criticism. If the criticism is sound, it actually implies that the audience listened to the speaker carefully. In literature, excessive criticism may end in a sort of difficulty, especially you might find that many of the poets have made very sarcastic remarks against each other, and they have become very satiric. And the word satire, which many of you are familiar with, where they wanted to hit upon each other, and at times they also crossed the limit. Fine. Most of these poets, especially satiric writers, satiric poets, they at times have made very scathing attack on their adversaries. But then a sound criticism can serve as a great resource to evaluate the effectiveness of one's speech or presentation, my dear friends. Now, how to? Because as public speakers, we are bound to invite criticism. We can get feedbacks, but how should we respond to it? How can we face criticism and feedback? There are certain areas, there are certain common areas of criticism. Fine. How should we tackle? Be loud and express confidence through your voice. Once again, I will take you back to the non-verbals. I mean your para-language, fine, para-language. I mean not only through the content that you deliver, but through other ways of language also. For example, the way you have a control over your pitch, rate, delivery, your intonation patterns, and the way you pronounce every word. I mean every word is to be pronounced, every word is to be spoken very distinctly. So, as a speaker, in order to save yourself from some harsh criticisms, it is better that you are in such a position where every word of yours is spoken clearly. Then another way is, please try to concentrate yourself to the content part. Your content, at times you will find that only because of the negative feedback or criticism that you receive through the non-verbals of the audience members, when they are not cooperating what to do. Sometimes you actually feel very much disappointed and you start deviating. But again, let me remind you, in one of the lectures we have said digressions. Please invite digressions. Tell a short story. Give them a breather. Give them some amount of relief by becoming personal, by cracking some jokes, but relevant ones, of course. So, you can bring digressions, but then you must be very careful. Not too much of digression be there. Fine. The digression is just only a weapon to bring them back to your content or to your message. Then bring a sort of connection is very important. Connection with whom? Not only with your content, but with your audience members. Connect better with your audience members. And how is that possible? That is possible through proper eye contact. Remembering well the culture part, because eye contact at times may have different meanings. If some starts gazing into, staring into, fine, that will again lead to a sort of controversy. So, as a speaker, you need to maintain a proper eye contact, and not only the eye contact, rather you may show an exemplar behavior in terms of the use of kinesics. I mean through your facial expressions, because if I respond negatively to the negative comments of my audience members, what will happen? Naturally, the connection will be lost. Fine. So, one must, as a speaker, try to mend the fences by providing positive response and by taking the responses or the feedbacks of the audience members in a very positive manner. Now, one must, as a speaker, also be very careful as how, as a communicator, when he is transmitting the message, how it is being received at the other end. How does the receiver take, or how does the receiver decode the message? So, sometimes one may feel very much disappointed and dejected and subject to a sort of disappointment, but no, he must not let himself be written down by the responses of or by the negative feedback of the audience members. Another is approach the suggestions with an open attitude and growing mindset. I mean, as a speaker, we are gracious enough. We can take the feedbacks and the criticism, even if it is harsh, in a very positive manner, because they can be very helpful in the times to come. Now, we must also try to understand what sort of criticism can be there. It is not that always the criticism will be negative. Sometimes you may also find among these negatives some covert constructive criticism. Now, what is constructive criticism? A constructive criticism may help you in a very objective manner to analyze without any personal bias. Sometimes you are a speaker, but sometimes you may also be an audience. Fine. So, when you also have to provide some feedback or criticism, see to it that you provide a sort of constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is, or we can call constructive criticism as a sort of feedback which can offer positive recommendations. Fine. And while offering constructive criticism, one has to be very specific and very clear, because this can motivate the speaker to improve further. Whereas on the other hand, destructive criticism, as the term itself says, it is destructive in nature. You are biased to content, you are biased to the person, you do not offer any recommendation, you are just criticizing for the sake of criticism. Your comments or your criticisms are vague, ambiguous, fine, no clear message is there, and such a sort of criticism will most often lead to a sort of demotivation and put the speaker in a sort of disappointment. there can be components of effective criticism, how we should try to develop that. Here is a sandwich technique where you can find right from positive, be positive. So, praise, by praising you are positive. It is actually a sub goal that learner has achieved, but sometimes there is a challenging target, fine, and this criticism actually, when such a sort of criticism is there, the learner actually needs to improve upon. The learner needs to improve upon, my dear friends. Now, we must also try to spend some time on the sort of feedback, the types of feedback. The feedback also can be positive, and the positive feedback, sometimes you may be, as I said earlier, you may be very skeptic about that. If the feedback is full of appreciation, then you will find there are no suggestions. So, sometimes in a sort of negative feedback, you find a sort of suggestion is there. At least when somebody points a finger, you become conscious as a speaker. Negative feedback leads into a sort of conflict, and in return it loads you with anxiety and stress. If the feedback is corrective, it will not only motivate you as a speaker, but it can also help you understand the errors that you committed, and there is a scope for improvement, my dear friend. So, we will rather appreciate if the feedback is corrective. Now, how to gather feedback? I think there are some people who will often ask you about the feedback of any event, of any performance, but not everyone. But then how can we, unless and until we have asked, but still we can get some feedback through the non-verbal cues, as I have been telling, that the non-verbal language which is written on the faces of the crowd, that can provide you a sort of live feedback from the audience's faces, from the audience's countenance. And this prompts the audience to ask questions. If you are doing well, the audience will be tempted to ask questions. Sometimes they feel that the connection has been built, so they may at times put questions, clarify their doubts, fine. In many organizations, even after many events, you will find that a feedback pro forma is also circulated. Careful speakers, sincere speakers often see to it, they want to know what sort of feedback have they received, fine. Sometimes as speakers, many of them provide the email also to ask people to provide them with their feedback, because they believe, such speakers often believe, that the feedback is going to help them overcome certain things. Now, in this regard, my dear friend, imagine that there can be no feedback, imagine that there can be no criticism, but who can stop you from self-criticism? But then, as human beings, we often find we keep patting our own backs, isn't it? We keep applauding ourselves, glorifying ourselves, no? But it is time for the speakers that they also criticized themselves, and that is through what? Through which technique? Self-criticism. Self-criticism is a psychological tendency through which one can evaluate oneself negatively, fine. One can evaluate oneself negatively, and this may result in certain feelings. Worthlessness, fine. Sometimes when you start looking at your own performance, you may come across, you may tell yourself, I am just worthless. You may talk of failure, guilt, anxiety, depression. Now, how does it result? If you go for a sort of self-criticism, then it may result in a sort of self-esteem which is hampered and which may sabotage your opportunity in the public speaking arena. That is why, my dear friends, let everyone maintain a sort of self-esteem. But there is one caution. When you are maintaining self-esteem, don't be over defensive, don't be too much defensive. excessive perfectionism drives toxic self-criticism. If a person wants that he should be an extraordinary one, fine, and if he believes in a sort of excessive perfectionism, that can actually result in a sort of toxic self-criticism. A public speaker must try or must strive to be emotionally intelligent and mature to overcome such tendencies. Now, in this regard, mention may be made of a therapy that can help. What is that therapy? This therapy in cognitive psychology is called rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT. Now, what is this REBT and what can it do? This was actually proposed by Dr. Albert Ellis in 1955, and through that what Ellis said, that either low or high self-esteem, one can either have a high self-esteem, majority of the people have got high self-esteem, one can at times when one fails frequently, consecutively, one can develop a sort of low self-esteem. So, either low or high self-esteem can be unhealthy, because any level of self-esteem reflects occurrence of a dysfunctional self-rating process. It is actually a sort of occurrence of dysfunctional self-rating process. You are not able to decide an evaluation of one's global worth. In this regard, what happens is, in this process, our thinking about events lead to emotional and behavioral upset. So, what should you do? One should always be ready to become a sort of self-acceptor. What is this self-acceptor, my dear friend? And this self-acceptor, you will find it is called USA, unconditional self-acceptance. Every man cannot be good in every field. Every person has got some amount of limitation, my dear friend. But how many of us accept that? We always try to compete with others. We always we always become jealous of others' success and all. So, it has been seen or observed in a research that those who score higher in USA means unconditional self-acceptance, those who accept unconditionally. So, those scoring higher in USA tend to be lower in depression. If I admit that I cannot be everything, perhaps I will not invite too much depression to myself. So, be lower in depression proneness and more objective in their evaluations of their own speech performances. So, as a speaker also, when you have given a presentation or a talk or whatsoever, please accept the limitations. You are Mr. X, be satisfied with becoming Mr. X, do not try to be Y. There is beauty in everyone, there is benediction in everyone, but then one has to realize that others' beauty, others' possession, others' qualities cannot be instilled, even though we may try our level best. But what to do? In this regard, if you can maintain a better emotional intelligence, that will actually curb not only your jealousy, not only your anxiety. So, one has to see that one makes proper use of one's emotional intelligence. We already had a lecture on emotional intelligence, you can go back and study for yourself. So, emotional intelligence is also a key to handling all sorts of criticism and feedback, both positive and negative. There are certain components in emotional intelligence which can help you, and how will you practice when as a speaker you receive some brickbats, as a speaker you receive some harsh criticism, you have to maintain your cool, my dear friend. What to do? Pause and listen, let the other person finish. No, there is a limitation to everyone, and you know, my dear friends, everyone actually wants to have a sort of outlet. How long can a man speak? How long can a man criticize you? Depersonalize the message. Don't take it emotionally. Rather, you take it in a different state. Take away, whatever he says, try to find out what were the weaknesses as suggested by him or as observed by him. Let us work on those shortcomings or weaknesses. Appreciate the critic. Even if they provide you a negative feedback or a negative criticism, appreciate. You have been very generous, isn't it? So appreciate the critic for their time, attention and suggestions. With one's emotional intelligence, one can also be one's best critics. Do you not know your limitations? Do you not know your knowledge? Are you not able to measure your own talent? I think everyone can, all of us can. So if we practice that, I think it is better, that will emerge as a better speaker, as a better performer. But please remember that as a speaker, if some of the harshest criticisms of others demotivates you, perhaps you are not going to emerge as a successful speaker. Because as I have been telling you, that as a speaker your job was, your aim was to persuade your audience members. If you can persuade your audience members, why can't you persuade yourself, my dear friend? Make effective use of persuasion even for yourself. You know, in one of the very famous books by Christopher Turk, the name of the book is Effective Speaking, where Christopher Turk says that there can be 7 levers of persuasion. What are those 7 levers? The first is self-preservation. As an individual, as a speaker, as a performer, I think it is our right to protect ourselves, our profession, our likes, our dislikes. So please believe in making a sort of self-preservation. Protect yourself, fine, but don't be over defensive. Possession, fine. Imagine you are going to speak on a very new topic and the audience members are not going to react favorably. But then through your language, as I have said in the previous lecture, through your language, tell them that once you are armed with the talent of public speaking, the future actually belongs to you, my dear friend. Everyone wants to be proud of one's possession, and if you can show them the sunny side, I think your critics also will turn into your admirers. Then comes power. Nietzsche always says that one thing that majority of us hanker after is power. My dear friends, I am also trying to tell you that if you train yourself in public speaking, you are as powerful as anyone. And the future belongs to you because you are powerful in terms of the knowledge, in terms of the nuances of speaking on different occasions, delivering talks and presentations on different occasions, on different events. So power is very important. So tell people, convince people about the power of whether you are selling something or you are trying to convince something about a product, about a policy, about an opinion, about a project, whatsoever. And then posterity. The tragedy of this world is that we do not want to remain in the present, rather we want to remain in the future. Most of us crave after our name and fame to be taken by the posterity, by the coming generations. Fine? My dear friends, we want that our achievements should be revered even in future. And for any such quality which you are going to promote or propose to your audience members, if you can tell them that even though you are not going to be convinced today, I think tomorrow you will run after it because tomorrow belongs to what I say, what I am trying to convince you. So by telling them about the posterity, I think once again you are going to win. And then convention. What is convention? My dear friends, you will often find that when you do something, there are many people who also would try to outshine you. And at times, if you feel disappointed because there are others also in the fray, I mean, it's not good. You must try to understand that since it is good, that is why many others are trying to compete with you. It has been a convention. When everyone tries to do or prefers to do something, I think it becomes a convention. So, my dear friend, as a speaker also, when there are other speakers in the fray and you feel threatened, it is not to be threatened, rather it is actually to feel accomplished that they are trying to follow in your footsteps. Then comes sentiment. My dear friends, though I have been telling you that when you speak as a public speaker, you must try to appeal to their emotions. Appeal to their emotions, no doubt, because everyone wants to be considered nice. But while appealing to their emotions, don't be blind. Sometimes emotionality has one difficulty, and the difficulty is that most of us are emotionally vulnerable. Fine? Our aims are often lost. Our aims are often misguided. It actually takes a different path when we are colored by a sort of emotionality. Tell people that this will help them and they will be remembered, because as I have been saying, that when you tell people about the future thing or the future relevance, they will actually appreciate. And then contrary suggestion. My dear friends, you might well remember that when you are either selling a product or you are trying to promote something, you will find that there are many people who are doing so. But in order to prove your own point, I don't want you to be defensive, rather I want you to be explicit. And how can you be explicit? How can you be fair? You can always point out some sort of deficiency in other alternatives. In contrary suggestions, you can actually carve a niche for yourself by saying that even though other products are working in the market, other books are selling well, but this book has or is going to go one step ahead, because it not only talks about something which is relevant today, but it also talks about something which actually is relevant in the days to come also. So, these 7 levers, as prescribed by Christopher Turk in his famous book Effective Speaking, will actually help you tide over the situation of anxiety, help you win over the harsh criticisms of life and also the negative comments that you get from your audience members. My dear friends, you will always find that though it is easy to be critical, but it is actually difficult for speakers to take something out of that criticism. And how is that possible? That is possible when we look towards these criticisms and feedbacks in a very sincere, in a very honest and also in a very fair manner. So, criticisms have always helped. I am actually reminded of one very beautiful Hindi line, Hindi doha you may call, where the poet says, Nindak niyare rakhiye, angan kuti chhawaye, bin pani, bin sabuna, nirmal karat sahay. What is the meaning? The meaning is that let there be a critic every now and then near you, because a critic will help clear all the dirt without making use of any soap or any detergent. My dear friends, having said so, let me come to wind up this talk by making a mention once again of a beautiful quote by Winston Churchill, one of the former Prime Ministers of England, who says, criticism may not be agreeable, but it is necessary. Fine. You may not agree with the criticism, but it is necessary. Why? It fulfills the same function as pain in the human body. It calls attention to an unhealthy state of things. This is very true that when you come across criticism, even though it is painful, it is hurting, yet it actually directs you to many unhealthy state of things. I hope you will also take criticism and feedback in the most positive way and try to improvise upon the lapses that you might come across from time to time in course of several discourses that you have made. With this, let me come to wind up this talk, wishing you all the best. Thank you.